Sophie, what's the one thing that people who are about to enter the services that you provide at Manor Community, what's the one thing that they need to know about social care?
I think the one thing that they need to know about social care is that whatever people are doing to support them, they should be at the centre. I think one of the problems with social care is that people feel like they have to almost put their own needs on the back burner because of systems or because of people are busy, but actually they're there to receive a service. They're there to receive good quality service and being vocal about what you need. Also, this applies to family and making sure that you get what you need is, I think, of utmost importance. We just did a report with Care and Support West. So that's one of the care associations in our area. As part of CoProduce Care, we linked up with them and we were looking at integration. So, how health and social care are working together or not. And what we tried to do with our research is we did mainly speak to care providers, but we centered the experience of the system around how it affects people who receive support. And I feel like a lot of decisions that are made, whether it's supporting care providers with a certain kit that will help detect falls or detect deterioration in people's health, it's all very short lived. The funding is short lived. And the only person that really struggles is the person who receives support. So whether it's something as big as I don't feel my needs are being met enough, or as small as, I am often looked after, but when care staff leave the room, I can't reach the water or the water jug. People just need to be empowered to speak up and have their needs met. Hmm.
Is there something you think comes naturally within the care environment? And specifically about the vulnerable individuals that you look after, and which are individuals with mental health challenges, with learning difficulties. Are they naturally going to have that voice, or is that something that we need to be coaching and supporting them to have?
Well, this is a really good question, and this is something that I probably would like to come on to, is how can we as care providers or family members help empower people to have that voice? Because typically when you enter care services, you are really vulnerable or you've gone through a crisis that requires you to have extra support. So, for example, our services in our care organisation, Manor Community, a lot of the things that we do is support people with mental health needs. And when people are in crisis, that might be seen by the untrained eye as challenging behavior rather than a call of distress. And it's about making sure that staff are trained and the community is trained to understand how to support someone and get their needs met when they're in that area of crisis. So I was on a panel in Birmingham at a care summit a couple of weeks ago. I was actually chairing a panel, and one of the organisations there, they provide extra care housing. So you've typically with that got a whole selection of buildings, maybe flats, and people within those flats, they live there, but they don't all have the same needs. So some people will be quite independent and they'll maybe go to the local shop that's part of the complex. And then others will be, with the advanced dementia. And so they can come out and they can meet each other, but not necessarily have exactly the same needs. And what the manager of that unit was saying was that they educate everybody who might come into contact with a person who suffers from dementia about dementia. So if you have, they gave an example of somebody going into one of their shops and a person with dementia was trying to pay and then they just froze and they couldn't understand, I think it was the coins or the money. But because there was another resident who did understand, they thought, oh, I've had the training, I know what this might be. they then stepped in to support that person to carry on their payment. So they'll train people within that complex, and they'll also give training to the maintenance staff. They'll give training to people who run the shop, so that the whole community and the families, which is vital actually, don't miss them out. So in fact, the whole community is quite well. Um, they're well versed with how to recognize instances of distress and support that person in getting what they need. So actually, the whole idea of care provision isn't just about paid staff giving that support, because they can't be there throughout every interaction or every moment of someone's care journey. But it's about looking at the wider community and supporting them to understand the needs of that person so they can step in, give them that support, and then make sure that their needs are met. So, yes, I think there is for some people, yes, absolutely, they can voice up and they can be empowered to make sure that their own needs are met. But also, it is about a lot, and more, I think, about training people who are around that person, their support network. And it's more natural, we're around the people that we love or the community, hopefully. And if they know how to support us, then it's just gonna increase someone's experience of life towards the end of their life. I think, yeah, I think that was a good question.
I'm s- I'm skipping to the end of a thought here, so I'm going to say something and then I'm going to backtrack a little bit. Um, the question that I've got is, does that mean that we need to fix the education of society in general about how to support individuals who require care? I'm going to want to define that a little bit before we fix social care, and you can't fix the NHS without fixing social care. So the way that I'm envisaging this is that an individual at any one time is either independent or requires help or requires support or requires care or requires health. And that's sort of a continuum of support, if you will, or intervention. But help and support is something that, as you've identified, can be provided by society and by our social communities. I think we all see it on our lunch breaks. We go out, we go to a shop, we see an old person who is perfectly independent, but there are times when they require support and help and a little bit of care. And it's great to see people interact naturally with that person and go, well, actually, I'm going to step in and I'm going to give you that help or support. But it's not naturally in our society. So jumping all the way back in, do we need to have a wider conversation about society here, or is this about creating communities that support and moving people to those communities?
I think there's a bit of both, to be honest. I think I want to just go back a little bit to the idea of fixing social care. I've never that The whole term has never sat comfortably with me, and I think it's probably because it's usually used in a sentence in a political sense to feed into a narrative that social care is broken, so then we need to fix it. But actually, the more I read about it, the more I'm asked to do a bit of research around it, the people in social care, whether they are paid or unpaid carers or organizations, profit, non-profit, they are actually sometimes far ahead of the other systems that are saying that there's a problem with social care. So I think we need to understand what we mean by what does a fixed social care system look like before we try and dip in and fix or fiddle or throw money at certain parts of it. What's the actual end game? And is it really that social care is doing a fabulous job? It just needs more funding to do more of the same. There's nothing really so much to fix. What really needs to be fixed are the systems that surround it to make sure that there is better, for example, trusted assessors to help people go from hospital to the appropriate care service afterwards, or that there's better training recognition for the training that the staff already do. And on all the things that we talk about, actually, it's quite progressive in a lot of ways, but the system around it, whether it's with pharmacies interacting properly with care providers who have EMAs, or whether it's GPs understanding, new pieces of kit that are being used, like Wazan is a something we looked into, which helps identify someone's needs, and GPs need to feed into that to help share data effectively. Um, so actually, it's more about the system outside it. That's what I'm getting to understand. But yeah, I do think there's a perception side. So that's a community. That's everyone in the community needs to understand more how social care works, I think. And there needs to be a lot more honest conversation from maybe MPs, because there are a few MPs who have actually worked in the system in care, and for them to actually speak up and say this is actually how it works, and a lot of it does work and doesn't need tampering with or fixing. It just needs more support to do more of the same. um, and that's everybody needs to understand a bit more about that, and get an education piece would be fabulous. And then there is a community side to it where you'll have different care organizations providing different care support. And then they maybe have a bit of a duty to go outside to the community and support people. So, and educate the wider community. So, for our organizations, for example, our care organization, one of our homes is a home for people with mental health needs. And we started supporting people with mental health needs. It's a very family run care home. Usually, when you think of care homes, you think of big 60-bedded places. This has got 10 beds. It's never going to have more than 10 beds. So it's very much home from home. And my mum, who started it, I don't know, 40 odd years ago, she would she would interact with the local high street. And back then we had a butchers, and we had bakers, and we had all the local shops. It was very quaint. And she would say, she wouldn't necessarily identify people, but she would say, I've got this person and they've got this type of, someone who lives with us, we support someone, they have this type of need. Sometimes they get confused, or sometimes they would be going around asking for drugs, or sometimes some things will happen. But rather than go straight and maybe call the police, know that we are just around the corner. Here's our card. You no need to be afraid. We can come and support. So that was just understood, and it was absolutely fine. And so they would ring the home when they found someone was in distress and needed support, and we'd be able to support that person in the community. So it's a great way of especially people with mental health needs, and of getting away from society fearing people with care needs or pitying people with care needs, and actually taking on a bit more of a responsibility to become part of that person's care and care support or network. All you're doing is signposting that person to somewhere where they can get help, whether it's a care organization or somewhere else. So I think that there's space for both. There's space for wider education of society about care in general, and also educating local shops, local community about what we do. We also work with churches. We're close to our neighbours, so we've got Care Home Open Week coming up, and that's a great opportunity to invite family, friends, neighbours round for a barbecue. And it then just becomes fine. There's people that live next to us, and sometimes they might have a mental health breakdown, but I don't need to be too worried about that. I can help them by contacting the people who can give them more support. So yeah, you're absolutely right. On both sides, there's need for better education for sure.
What's the conversations like now that if you go back to the conversations your mother was having 40 years ago with the community and the conversations you're having now with the high street, is it easier? Are people as open to having those conversations? Or you mentioned that people society might fear or pity those with care needs. Is that a more modern trend, or is that something that you experienced or you remember when you were growing up?
I absolutely remember it when I was growing up. I think the fear mongering is so rife in the local press. It's I mean, then it wasn't clickbait, it was more turn the page bait. You know, you go and pick a newspaper up and say, oh, this person escaped from a mental health institution and they've gone around, you know, harassing people, whatever. So there was definitely some fear, but so that hasn't changed. I think the high street has changed. So there's more coffee shops, there's who with staff that change all the time. There aren't those sort of mum and pop to sort of like pop shops where you'll know somebody and they'll be in that shop and work there for 10 years. That has changed. And I think the staff may be a little bit nervous. So care staff going in and speaking to people who run those outlets and mentioning what we do and where we are. But once you break that barrier and you realize actually everyone has something to bring and support, it's fine. People are people at the end of the day. And either one of us, any one of us could have a mental health breakdown. I mean, it's intriguing when I used to look at the assessment plans. So I don't manage any of the care homes now, but back in the day, you know, I grew up with my mum looking after people. And then as I got older, I'd help with the boring stuff like, you know, helping to write the care plans and doing policies. I love that kind of stuff. But my mum was like, she's a nurse, she's a psychiatric nurse. So she was like, I hate it when CQC come because I just want to be caring for people on the ground. I don't want to be going through all these policies. It's just so dire. Um, so I see all of that stuff. So then you get an assessment, you read someone's history, and you think, okay, so that one suffered sexual assault when they were a young teenager, and that turned their life around, not in a good way. That person had a drug overdose, and that's how they've ended up. You know, that was a catalyst, and then suffering from mental health problems. This person got in a car accident, and now they have mental health. But before that, they were an architect, and before this, she was a nurse, and and this person had a nervous breakdown. And just reading those assessments really humanizes people in a special way. It really helps you understand that absolutely everyone is vulnerable to being in that position. So, as a society, we have a duty to make sure that those services are right and rightly supported, because it's not, people haven't made bad life choices. It's just that life happens and you might need that extra support. And that's why I'm so passionate about making sure that mental health services are doing the best that they can, making sure that support for people who use those services are as doing the best that they can, just changing again the narrative and the perception of those services. I think it's just so important.
If I look at um, our our family business, which is older person care homes, we're seeing a lot of people coming to us with very complex levels of need, particularly actually having had mental health challenges from a very young age, almost 30, 40 years old, and then they progress and they come with dementia plus all of the other mental health conditions. It seems that this has built up to us over the last 10 years. There's been an escalation in the level of need, both in terms of demand of individuals with complex levels of need, but also the actual underlying complexity. Are you experiencing the same thing?
Yes and no. So there's some people actually come into the care sector and they're quite young, um, and it's almost as if like early onset dementia. So that can happen, but I would say increasingly people's needs are more acute. They have more health needs, and people are older, which is fabulous because we went through a stage of having quite a few centurions, so people over 100. So that was lush. And to celebrate their 104th birthday with them was just like, wow. Um, Yes, that's really quite special. But people are coming with higher needs, and there's the so the care work has become more health related. And there's a lot more pressure on care staff, I think, that there was before, or ever was before. Uh, and I don't think that's recognised. And I think that's going to be a increasingly difficult problem. And also the estates. So whether some care homes are built and designed to care for those people who have needs where the majority of people might need hoists or have some kind of mobility issue. And actually, the training needs of staff need to increase quite a lot. And I feel like they have increased over the last 10 years, like you're saying. And we're lucky because we have a in-house trainer at Manor Community, and she's great because she'll respond to our clients' needs. So we can say to her that we have these people who are coming in, we've done these type of assessments. Can you upskill the staff in something specific? And she's an ex-nurse, and she delivers accredited training and CPD accredited training, and she's just fantastic. And she'll go into services and she'll observe care being given, and she'll check that her training is being implemented. And where it's not, then she'll call the select group of staff in and she'll do workshops with them, not to accuse them of anything, but to try and help understand them, help them to understand you did this care this way, this is how it should be done, this is the difference, and this is the impact. So she's able to respond to those changing needs, which is really helpful. I'm not sure that how easy that is for organizations that maybe don't have an in-house trainer, or aren't able to just call on somebody like that. And I think it is quite tricky because the needs are getting more complex. Like you said, you've got mental health needs, you've got comorbidities, and then you've got the issues with, you need more floor rooms and you haven't got as many. And then you've got the stalemate where you want to take on clients. The estate, the property doesn't really lend to that, or it's got a few rooms that can facilitate those needs. So local authorities don't have as many people to place in the right homes. So that's tricky. But there are options. There's more than care homes. So hopefully people will just adapt to the different care types of care provision that there are.
Mm. It's really interesting. We are very much older person care, and I think that would be characterized in 2016 as just below health, not NHS, but often discharges from hospital, later life care, and mobility, frailty, weak skin, the quote unquote usual and traditional needs of an older person. We're actually now seeing much more demand, and where we're having to upskill, certainly over the last 10 years, is around mental health and behaviors that challenge. What's fascinating is you're saying almost the inverse, that actually that mental health sector, the challenging behaviors, was your bread and butter, and now you're having to upskill into the more health rated areas. Do you think that goes back to your point around that people are struggling to find the right place, or is it that we almost have two separate pathways that just now happen to be colliding because of aging and because of how we're all living longer with these relevant comorbidities?
I'm not sure where it originates from, but I do think that there's a lack of recognition, especially from commissioning authorities or ICSs, of how complex care has become. It used to be quite simple, and maybe it's because the research wasn't there and the realization of how people weren't linking someone's behavior to a mental health distress. It was more sort of, oh, that's just the way they are. Practices have come along quite a lot. I do worry that because of resource changes, not in our services so much, but generally, if people are really challenged with having the right staff who are trained properly, how much are people resorting to chemical restraints? I think it's quite researched in mental health hospitals. I think there's quite a little bit of research in care homes across the piece, in supported living and living care and other areas of care. I don't know how much that is researched, but that is a difficulty, I think, because medication is often seen as the panacea to behavior challenges. I think for a variety of reasons. if you're a staff member that's on your own and you don't have anyone to support you, sitting down with someone and spending one-to-one for an hour to try and de-escalate can just not be a reality. So I think people might not even think too much about it, but the protocol might be, okay, you do now go and you just give them their PRN. So I don't know whether how much that's being done. I think there's probably some quick fixes that are being played out on the ground that maybe mask some of the issues, but it's definitely got more complicated. And I don't think commissioning really understands it either. So commissioning wants a very kind of like black and white way of approaching care. So you might have a care plan and then they just want a certain amount of support for that person. But actually, when you look into it, they need slightly more mental health support, even though the initial diagnosis is dementia or vice versa. But commissioning is, local authorities are so strapped with for cash. I think sometimes it's oversimplified, and then you wonder whether people are, care homes are really commissioned enough to give the kind of support that they want to give. I find the frustration that people express from a provider point of view is very much about not being able to give the quality of care that they want to because there isn't the resource. And what worries me about that is providers are always seen as the fall guy. We can just blame providers. Even with the Casey report, I am quite nervous with how much they're going to put the onus on providers and say there are those rogue providers and they're not doing this, they're not doing that. And that's where the problem is. Rather than looking at the whole system, I hope that they have a good, comprehensive representation of how the system, doesn't necessarily work right. So, yeah.
Mm. And in terms of stress and all that, then you've got the individuals who are caring for the individuals before they come into care. Family members, dependents, even I guess in some of your younger cases, you'll have parents of the individuals who have tried to care. They've done their best. They've given every ounce of energy that they have. It still progresses to a point where they can't care. And then they've got to go, well, someone else has got to step in here. And that's a huge pain point for a lot of people that end up placing with us. The emotions that the family go through are amazing. Do you see that in your sector in terms of when people get placed with you, the guilt and the negative emotions, or is it a much more positive pathway to support?
Um, I'm probably the wrong one to ask on this one because I tend not to have so much of a involvement with the family directly. What I've seen more, it's just really sad, is the realization for people who themselves move into a care home. So I was visiting one of our care homes and I came up to the front door and there's this guy and he was really walking briskly and he had this fabulous haircut. It was just so like prim and proper and very regimented. That reminded me of army. And he had a tracksuit on. It was really hot, but anyway, he had a tracksuit on. And then he walked into the care home. That's how I knew, okay, he lives with us. And then later on, I saw him sitting in the conservatory. It's this conservatory. It's got a lovely view, and he was having his tomato soup and his bread, and he was just sitting there by himself. He didn't fancy sitting in the dining room. I don't know why, but anyway, he was having it in the conservatory. And I thought, I'll sit down and have a little chat. And he's saying to me how, oh, his home isn't quite what it was. He needs to be here, but he's not going to be here for long. And he just explained to me, oh, I've just been for a jog, went around the building, went for a jog. So quite independent, but I thought, I wonder if he's respite or not. So I said to the manager, oh, I met this chap and we had a little chat. And she said, yeah, his house is pretty much like it's totally ruined. It's really bad. He can't really live there anymore. Really bad. It's unsafe. Hoarding issues. And so really the decision has been made for his best interest that he does need to find some way. He probably might have to sell his house. And I just thought, oh, this is really sad because his needs have changed, but in his mind, he's still a 21, and he had actually been in the army years ago. So in his mind, he's still like maybe 21, 30 in the army, just gone for a jog. He hadn't gone for a jog. He'd gone for a speedy walk, maybe. But in his head, he'd just gone for a jog around the block. No, it's fine if he's living in that world, and he looked, really good for it. But I thought that is sad, that kind of transition from feeling that you're independent, but actually you can't manage things, and there isn't family there that can do it for you. And then another lady, and she was just feeling a bit down in the dumps because she'd had a fall, and that's how she ended up. I think, and sometimes when people are quite frail, falls have such an impact on people, as you know. And she was now in the care home, and it was respite, but it was looking like it might have to last longer because of the way that she had fallen, and how where she was just wasn't appropriate for her anymore. And at that point, she had only been there maybe a few hours, a day or two, and she wasn't ready to be away from her home. She wanted to go back home. And it's just, I mean, a couple of weeks later, she was fine. She was settled. But it's just that transition of a life. I can't imagine it really, but I'm guessing we'll all have to go through it at some point, of being and managing on your own just about. And then you have that life event where your mental health, you know, fails you, or dementia kicks in such a big way you can't really function, or you fall and you just can't stay where you are, and your whole life is just changed overnight. I really felt for them, because once they've done the transition and they're settled, people tend to be absolutely fine, and they get on brilliantly. They have a new group of friends. They're all talking together, dancing, laughing, doing activities, going out with each other, going on trips or whatever, together or individually, whatever they fancy. But it's that loss of true independence and moving into having to be supported because of no fault of your own, but your body is saying it's time. That can be quite sad. And I think family, there probably is a little bit of guilt, but I think if you have a good relationship with the family, and if the family know that they are in a place that's comfortable, that the relative is comfortable, they are well looked after, they are understood, so their specific needs and idiosyncrasies are accepted and supported, um, and crucially, that family member is kept well informed, makes all the difference. I think, and that's the part I think sometimes is quite difficult for managers, is to keep that family informed regularly. And I hope that technology will play a bigger part in that as we go forward, because the manager's task has been like, I feel like managers have gone from being two-handed people to octopuses, where they just need to do all the things all the time. They need several limbs just to stand still, or just to keep things afloat. So yes, it is tricky, but I think a good service will help families not feel the guilt so much, and just feel like they're the relief. It changed from a guilt to a relief. But again, I'm sure there's lots of families who feel like, they would have liked things to be different. Yeah.
What makes a good family in terms of that initial step from a provider's perspective? What do you, in our world, we know exactly what we think we know what a good family looks like, but you've touched on it there. But what we have good families and bad families, I guess. What makes a good family for you in your service?
I don't really know. There's no like avatar family that we think, oh, great, we've got one of those. Fabulous. We don't have to worry. They're going to be supportive of us. I think really the onus has to be on us to try and keep people well informed and do the best that we can, and also keep our cool when you have family members that are nervous, that are worried, that want updates every sort of day, and that's really hard to manage when you've got several tens of people around. is a family that can really be understanding, I suppose, and take time to understand how the home works, who is supporting their loved one, and making sure that they know who to come to. I think sometimes people can get a little bit wary of families and think, maybe we shouldn't tell them this because they'll be worried or that. It's never a good decision to keep information back or try and be avoidant. Creating that good understanding about what's happened with a loved one's family that day, good or bad, I think is always going to help the relationship between provider and family. um, I think where it gets tricky is when you have family members who are a risk to their family member who's been looked after. So there's been instances where we've had uh, some, usually it's spouses actually, uh, who maybe are verbally aggressive, verbally abusive. So will ring their, what usually is a wife, up on the phone, and they will shout at them and they will say horrible things to them. And then after that phone call, that person is so disturbed for the rest of the day. And then it takes time for staff to really support that person to come to baseline again. So that can be really tricky. And also, I think most care organisations have faced this, where you've got family members who maybe don't have a great way of managing their loved one's money. So we've had instances where that person has money, but the money is managed by a family member. Maybe they do have power of attorney, maybe they don't, and that person just needs new clothes. We want to take them out, we want to do things with them, but that family member is really holding back funds. And it may just be a hangover from how their relationship was when they didn't need our care. It's not because they're in a care home, it's just the way that some families operate, but it's highlighted within the care system. And actually, the care system is quite good in that situation, because then if you have a good support system from safeguarding, from the local authority, then you can actually make that person's life better than it was before they came to that care home or home care organisation, because you can put safeguards in place to allow that person to have autonomy over their finances and to make choices. And sometimes when people come into care services, it's the first time that they've actually been asked, what do you want to eat today? What do you want to wear today? So sometimes actually that separation from family can be a new lease of life, where people are re-understanding, rediscovering themselves. So every family is different, every family dynamic is different. And actually it's a good question, because I think when people think about care, they only think about somebody with physical needs, but actually there's the whole system of people to manage outside of that, and family can be a tricky one to manage. So it all depends how you choose to go down and support that person, but a family can challenge you, and some family can be extremely supportive. So in our support services, at certain times where somebody doesn't have high needs, but the family are quite involved, we can work quite well with them to say if there is a staff shortage, which doesn't really happen in those services, but say there is around just before Christmas or there's bank holidays, whatever, then you can say to that family, and the hours are quite flexible. You can say, do you want us to shift the hours that we normally support your loved one to a different day? Employ different staff from different parts of the organization. They might not know that person as well, but they'll still be within our organization. Or do you want to support your family member yourself that day? And then sometimes it might be, oh, fine, if their usual support worker isn't available, maybe they're sick, rather than you get somebody else, we'll take them out for that day. And that's quite a nice way of working with families. It feels like you're more of a community. So, I mean, it depends what kind of service you run, and how you're set up, but actually have spending time to inform the families and to work with them it's just brilliant because they become part of the support team. It's not them handing over their loved one to you and say, right, I'm off to Australia, which sometimes happens, but it can be just, we're there and we're in the background if you need us, but also if you could be that, we're there as the main caregivers, that's fine. So it's just
Yeah.
it's just the way you choose to manage those relationships, really.
Yeah. One thing that always surprises me about social care is that we seem to be based on the principle that everyone is nice and that everyone will always work towards everyone else's best interests. We often forget that is not the case in society, and that you do come across people who are not nice, um, not only in terms of the people that we care for, but also their family members sometimes. And I'd imagine that in the mental health part of your world, that must actually people who aren't consistently nice, who aren't consistently kind, that must challenge the service
Yeah,
sometimes.
we had one brother of someone we supported, and he was an alcoholic. And it's really hard when you have family members who have their own challenges because when he was sober, just a lovely brother. Like anyone would want to have a brother like him. Knew exactly how to talk with his sister, was kind and loving and supportive and funny. Great. But then again, he might come to the home and he would be swearing and verbally abusive and accusing threatening the staff that he was going to be physically abusive. And so you have to then try and you have to put boundaries in and say these are the boundaries. You can't be coming and visiting us when you are inebriated. It's not something that we can accept. It's not safe. Um, so there's a real difficult balance to make because you don't want to entirely facilitate any type of safeguarding that might ban someone entirely when they're like that, because you still want that relationship, that brother sister relationship, but also you don't want to be putting staff and the person you're supporting in danger. So that can be a real challenge. And again, it is, if you have a good safeguarding system, if you have professionals that are supportive of what you're trying to do, and I know not all areas have that for whatever reason, but if you do, then it's just great that kind of multidisciplinary working, as they might call it, or just working together where you as a provider can even sense check your boundaries, your rules with them and say, this is what we're experiencing. Can we just run this by you? Are there any other safeguards we could put in place to support that person who may or may not have capacity? And working with also, of course, his sister and the individual themselves to say, this is what we're putting in place. This is why we're doing it. What do you think? Are you happy with this? And actually, for us, it worked out really well because she was totally supportive and I think relieved that there was someone who could create that boundary for her uh, where she probably didn't feel strong enough to create it for herself. So it is a way of managing it and also not managing it on your own. I think a lot of providers feel like they have to do things on their own by themselves because they are the ones that are on the CQC registration. But if you can work with the multidisciplinary teams and draw on their advice, then it does make you feel a little bit more confident and it does bring in their expertise. At the end of the day, that's what they're paid to do, in order to keep people safe because you can't keep people in what did Baroness Hale say? A gilded cage. You don't want to do that. You want people to have freedom, to have relationships, but you want those relationships to enhance their quality of life, not to shrink them or make them unsafe. And I think in the care homes, definitely that spouse sort of relationship where you do have sometimes a husband being verbally aggressive to a wife who you're looking after and having to put those clear boundaries, saying, actually, you really can't visit the home at this point because just so a real risk to her, a real risk to them. And, we had one instance where police were involved because they found there was issues and stuff going on at the house. So what that woman had moved out from was really quite a toxic, dangerous situation. And then you, as a care provider, have to discover that, because people aren't necessarily going to come straight away and say, I was abused at home and now I'm here, I can tell somebody. Sometimes that happens over time because that person has lost their voice, they've lost their autonomy, they've lost their ability to speak up for themselves. And you're there as a care provider in your team to try and connect the dots, and then see how you can support that person. Is that, do it, maybe was the capacity there, and if it isn't, then how do we support that person? And so it can be so tricky, and sometimes it seems very subjective, but actually that's where, again, you do draw on expertise of safeguarding, and you say, this is the evidence, this is what we're going through, can you help us to work with this person to keep them safe? So I mean,
Mm,
I don't think people actually talk about these type of complexities enough, if I'm honest, but there's ways to manage it, but it is tough.
yeah, it's unusual in that we have to not only think about the individuals that we care for and how do they interact on a day-to-day basis with our team members, who we also have to care about and care for because they're doing an incredibly difficult job. But we also have to care about all of the other individuals we care for and how they interact on a day-to-day basis. And then on top of that, we'll have the added complication of, actually, we need to care for the family members, and we need to make sure that those family members are looked after, supported, and actually have the input that they need to understand what's going on a day-to-day basis around care. It almost goes back to this point that you made earlier around the whole of society having this caring aspect. It's just that it seems to start from inside a care provider and go outwards, when actually what we want it to do and what we need it to do is to be from the outwards in as well. And that's the education piece that you were talking about earlier.
I was just wondering, actually, your view on this. How, because we'll come back again to, I think it's around, how do you educate a whole population around care? Obviously, I think this, so doing stuff like this podcast is so part of the journey of that. But do we also need to really push our politicians not to misrepresent social care in a way that's so basic and so foreign to what it actually is, and actually try and change people's perceptions? Because a lot of people, they're very busy. If a politician says, care providers are all rogue, or they're all participating in modern slavery, or they're all exploitative, or they're all owned by private equity, and trying to scam local authorities. If that's all people are hearing, that is really what they're going to believe. How do you think it's that we have to get to our politicians to change the narrative and actually speak truth, rather than rhetoric that doesn't resonate with the sector? Or do you think we just need to speak up a bit more ourselves through things like this, which are fantastic, but how many people are we going to reach out of the millions of people who need care?
I think this is the challenge that we face, in that we are such a fragmented sector that actually getting our voices out there is very difficult unless we do it over centralized platforms. So this podcast is part of that, and you're absolutely right that it's one brick in a wall, but I've just discovered over the last week or so a group called Carents, which is a support group for individuals who are caring for their parents. That's then got me onto Facebook, looking at groups such as Caring for Parents UK and other support groups, and just taking 5 minutes, 10 minutes a day on that just to respond. And I think the sector needs to be a little bit more communicative directly with the individuals who are either receiving care or the family members of it. And we need to do crazy stuff as well, like hosting a podcast. Or one thing that we've done at one of our care homes is we've just turned around and said, okay, 1 week's free respite. Let's just do it. Let's just break that barrier down and get people in. And that's going to cost us however many £1,000s of lost revenue. But actually, what does it do? It brings the local community in and shows them what we can do. And I think, but that is just older person care. But if we're going all the way through social care, which is children's care leavers, mental health, learning difficulty, midlife care, at-home care, domiciliary care, care homes, the list goes on. And then I want to talk about libraries, and I want to talk about mentoring and all the other forms of support that social care has. I don't think that any one solution fixes it, if I'm honest with you. And I don't think that any one reform fixes it. And I think as we go through these episodes, that's what I'm learning.
So here's the thing. I like to think about I agree with everything you're saying. It's fabulous, first of all. But I think I like to look at what is already there that we can tap into, which is obviously, I don't know what you mean exactly by the libraries, but I'm kind of thinking, yeah, that's kind of half of it. But and I remember when I was doing my MBA way back when, in my early 20s, and we had this project, and I can't remember exactly what it was, but you basically were given a scenario of this company, and they were really struggling, and they had all of these different resources, and basically they weren't really using them properly. So then you go away and see how they can use them properly. And then some people came back with a fantastic business plan where they looked at everything that they had rather than trying to raise more funds for something else. And they said they're just not using everything properly. So they've got this space, they've got empty warehouses, they've got places that they could actually use, and they're just not using them properly. And I do wonder whether we do that a little bit of social care and with social care. And what I'm thinking about is, do we need care associations to come together and with providers to change the narrative properly? So forget about whether you're association that's for profit, not profit, whatever, just care sector. Brings them together, people who look after carers, people with lived experience, the local care associations, that because they're a huge group. That's where there's no real I mean, there is still a bit of fragmentation, but there's lots of organizations that have popped up who are bringing people together more than I ever remember since being in this, since I was way back when. So I feel like there are organizations out there, but if they could come together on 4 points that they could all agree with and then just hammer down on those, it would eventually gather steam. It would eventually change the rhetoric around social care. I feel like sometimes care associations feel like they're all doing a good thing, but in their silos, like, oh, well, I'm doing it for this part of the sector, I'm doing it for that part of the sector. And then, oh, well, I'm in this location, I'm in that location. And that's fine. That's really good. But I think if you want to get traction, you need, could they not soak up all these fantastic ideas like what you have and other people have been talking about, and then start presenting, the top four, and then let that get traction, let the media start listening, because it's a big group and they can't say, oh, we're fragmented. They know we've come together as this, and this is what we all agree on, and then go from there. Because I just think that lots of people doing different things is great locally, but its change is going to be too slow. And also, I think that the sector is going to really struggle. I think it's going to really struggle to survive in the next 5 years or so, which is sad, because I think the smaller care organisations are just not. They're not going to be able to survive. And it's really interesting because lots of our care homes are quite small, and, I mean, I love the big ones, and they've got gyms and swimming pools and all of that. That's where I wanna be when I grow old. But actually, there's a lot of people who, when I say, "Well, why did you choose us?" We've got quite a cottagey feel in one of the homes. There is some of them got en suite, some of them haven't, "Why did you choose?" And I said, "Yeah, but it's just so comfy. It's so homely. It reminds me of my home." I was like, "Well," and even when you have people who they could choose a really big room, and they're like, they choose a smaller room in a care home. You're like, well, why did you do that? And they said, oh, because it reminds me of my actual bedroom at home. It isn't huge with an ensuite. It's quite cozy, and I've got all my trinkets, and my curtains are frilly, and this reminds me of where I was. Um, so I do worry that we are going to lose those type of homes because they can't. be sustainable. And it does call for some of those larger associations to just come together as one voice to do more and try and change the narrative and promote some of the those examples and those ideas that you're having. Yeah.
Do you think that that choice is genuinely there for people in the sector at the moment, or do you think that actually the if someone says, okay, I need to go into a care home, and they have that opportunity to choose between a care hotel versus a care home, to very loosely describe the two separate, sort of the new build versus the more cottagey or homely feel, do you think people actually have that genuine choice given how the market is currently commissioned and funded?
I think in some areas maybe they will do. It's a very much a postcode lottery with care. And some areas they won't. And it depends if you're a self funder. If you're not a self funder, everyone's at different stages. So um, they may or may not have that choice. But I actually do believe in people understanding how nuanced the sector is. So I've been so at that summit, that care summit that I was at a couple of weeks ago in Birmingham, there was someone talking about the extra care housing. There was also someone talking about living care. There was your traditional home care. And obviously we do care homes. I don't think people really know that living care, for example, exists. And and also when I did speak to someone who runs living care, they said, well, some local authorities just won't commission it for some reason. Um, I don't know why, but there's research now being done to say it could help people who have dementia because they're able to. So with home care, you might have quite a lot of changes in staff. You may or may not, but depending, you might do. The whole idea with living care, obviously, is that you will have the same person for a longer period of time. So anyone with dementia, that's really quite supportive to their needs. Um, but I mean, I now at the age where my friends are starting to see their loved ones getting older and maybe needing care, and when they say, oh, they don't want to go into care home and home care is quite expensive, and I say, what about living care? They go, what? And I said, live in care. And they say, I have no idea what that is, Sophie. So I think there's a lack of understanding from the general public about the choice that is out there. There is an issue with commissioning for people who are not self funding, for commissioners to choose other options to have on the framework for people to choose from. So there's a lack of choice in that sense. And then, as you say, do people have choice? I think maybe in some instances they have too much choice. I mean, if you see how tenders are going at the moment, I remember when you had a local authority who had maybe 30 providers. Okay. Now you've got local authorities who have 200 upwards providers that they have to manage. I was talking to someone about this the other day. That for me is, it seems like it's choice because there's lots of it, but sometimes you can have too much of a good thing. And when you actually do look at who is getting onto the framework, these are people who don't really know what they're doing and they don't really have an experience. And sometimes they don't actually have the properties to place people in. But as soon as they're on the framework, then local authorities have a duty to quality assess them. So that's putting them into even more difficulty because they're not going to be like the CQC, who has all these providers again, who they can't go in and assess because they don't have enough inspectors. So there is some, that concept of just having too many people to manage, and actually you have a lot of choice, but it's not the right choice. And then obviously in some areas you don't have enough enough variety of choice. If that makes sense. But it's totally a postcode lottery, I feel.
Hmm. What's I mean, your services, I think, are a bit more Bristol
Yeah, that's
based.
right. So BNSSG is Bristol, South Gloucestershire, North Somerset, not in that order. Yeah.
What's it always been a fascinating area for us. We operate with the further south we go is Gloucestershire, and into Herefordshire. So sort of the next bit down, we've sort of explored it and gone. Ooh, it's a bit. It feels a bit weird and woolly down there for some reason. Is I've spoken to a gentleman called Theodore in an episode that's coming up. He's based in London, and London has some really unique challenges based on its geography and the cost of living. And Bristol has never been a cheap city to live in, or indeed go out for a
Mm.
pint in. What's it like at the moment over there?
House prices are very tricky because it's I mean, I'm not going to complain about this, but there's a fantastic commute from London to Bristol. So it used to be 2 hours 20 years ago, and now it's maximum an hour and 15. So you barely get to open your laptop before you're at the station. Um, and so that's contributed to it, along with what the issue that most people have, which is about housing supply. So that's quite a bit of an issue. So if you don't have enough housing stock, again, you have a lot of providers on these frameworks, but they don't necessarily have property to work in. So, I don't know how you're going to do supported living, but that's an issue. So it is quite expensive. But also geographically, if you're providing services like we do in clusters within Bristol, you've got the buses, it's easy to cycle around places, it's easy to walk from service to service, the way we have it for our supported living. So we have a core staff team who can take over from somebody if they're on annual leave, and the clients know them, even if they aren't supported by them every day. So you can create quite a lovely community in that sense. And I love that. And that's really special. And I think that's why we've had quite really good attrition rates. And we've had some of our staff have stayed with us for nearly sort of like 17 years. We've got a core group of about five, I think, people who are about 16, 17 years they've been with us. So I think that if you have a good culture, you can create a really good team that wants to stay with you. And Bristol's quite good for that. And also, it's great in terms of things to do. So, one of our supported living schemes is quite near a local gym. It's near a cycle route. And there's just lots to access. Even if some of our people we support want to go to Bristol Pride, it's within walking distance. Um, and there's just fun things for people to do. People were at Weston-super-Mare the other day, the pier. That's one of my favourite beaches because I used to go there as a kid. So I've got memories of having, those donuts, warm donuts in a bag of sugar. You can't beat it. I'm sorry, but like sugar stuck to your cheeks. Um, so they were there, and then we had and then the couple of weeks before that, they went to the Bristol Hippodrome, which is again a 15-minute taxi ride or maybe 20, half an hour a journey. And the Hippodrome is fab. Great theatre. Just had The Greatest Showman. I think that's what they went to watch. Fabulous, great. So it's really good for people to feel part of their community. And there's still the odd kind of cheap pub. Come to Bristol and I'll take you around the pubs. I'll show you a cheap pint.
Perfect. It's really genuinely interesting in that when I was speaking to Theodore, he was very much London is quite isolating in terms of the community there, and he didn't speak about the integration that you've just spoken about in terms of. I've got friends who live in Bristol, and you're absolutely right. It is very possible to go from one leafy borough to another quite easily through walking, cycling, public transport, or what have you. It is a very walkable and enjoyable city to be part of, which the more urbanized areas of London, certainly the city, but even thinking about some of the sort of zone 1, zone 3, zone 3 areas, they're quite densely packed, which you don't have in Bristol. And I'm just thinking about it in terms of what we spoke about earlier, in terms of people being in the right place, the geographical place, and actually bringing people to a community that works for you. It sounds like actually in Bristol, that's the right community, whereas in London it's not, because of how the community naturally interacts with each other from a geographical perspective.
It may be, but it might be that we are very lucky because of the ethos that my mum started with. So she started with adult placement schemes, it used to be called, which is effectively which then turned into I can't think what it's called now, but it's where people go into somebody's home, a bit like fostering, shared lives. That's the one. So that's now turned into shared lives. So we would look after people in our own home who were quite independent, but they did have mental health needs, mild ones. But it allowed them to have a bit of freedom, and she would still work as a psychiatric nurse and then support them where she needed to. And then she got really good at that. And it was a time when people were seeing how mental health hospitals weren't necessarily conducive to sort of helping people get better, and they were trying to encourage care in the community. So that's where she actually preferred doing that than working in long stay mental health hospitals. So that's where she started to develop the care homes, and went from there. But I lived in those. So I would live with Dorothy and Mavis, and all these different characters. But it was always a home from home, I think, for them and for us. It was always a home from home for them and for us. So it just meant that um, they were able to, help with the washing, or help with washing up where they could, or mum would then encourage people to set the table, and just not through sort of like saying, well, this is part of your outcome that we need to help you achieve. It was just, can you just help us out here? And it felt very organic, that encouraging people to be independent. It wasn't something that was forced or detailed massively in a care plan. It was basically just felt very organic, felt like you were just supporting somebody with doing the washing or putting something away. And then people would build those skills. So, and then with that, got close to our neighbours, and we knew the local MP, and we knew the shops, and we were just there. There was this presence. And that's really continued, decades later, where I think because we've had staff who knew my mum, she passed away in 2010. We've still got staff who knew her and worked with her, and they obviously train new staff. So you've still got that ethos of a family feel, and that's one of the things people say about our organization. You feel like you're not just a cog in a wheel in a system. You're actually part of a family feel, and you've got friends, and they're obviously not your best friends for life, but they are part of your work. And it's just if it's a different focus. So I think we're quite lucky because we've tried to continue with that ethos. And I'm someone who I could never live anywhere where I didn't know my neighbors. I remember when I moved house and I just had my second baby, and I strapped him in at the front. I made some homemade cookies, and I went down my street and said, "Hi, I've arrived." I had this baby. Everyone loves babies. So I thought, that's great. Put the baby on the front so everyone would be kind to me. And I got to know them. We all became friends and stuff. And we do that with the homes. I always encourage every manager, even if they're a little bit, intimidated by the thought of just knocking on someone's door and saying, "Hi, I'm a new manager." I say, "No, you can do it. It's fine. They're not scary. They're not going to shoot you. It's okay." So you then break down those barriers, and it feels like you've got a community just like that. You just need to make the effort. So maybe I speak to friends who are in London, and they don't necessarily want to know their neighbours, but that's just not how we operate. We get that people are different characters and not going to be best friends with them, but for the benefit of people we support, they may have an interaction with somebody whilst they're having a mental health breakdown. And actually, it's better that we establish those relationships beforehand, so they know who to complain to or who to go to for support, rather than scare them and create more of an issue than is necessary. So
Mhm.
yeah, we're lucky in that sense.
Yeah, it's a really interesting thread there around sort of independence, in that you are working incredibly hard to ensure that the individuals you care for are as independent as possible. And I think there is a real risk that sometimes in a care setting we have this codependency, or if not this dependency, particularly in older person care, where where individuals really are robbed sometimes of their independence, and they are just, right, here's break. I'll get up, I'll get dressed, breakfast, I'll wait around now at lunch, not doing anything, and this very dependent mindset starts to set in. Um, it sounds like you are working really hard as an organization to work collaboratively with your neighbors, but also with the individuals you care for to ensure that that independence is rooted as a value within the organization.
It is. We do, and we do try. But I was speaking to a manager the other day, and her frustration was, I felt really sorry for her. So there is this. We started off with people, younger adults, as they'd say, anyone who's under 65, and they are much more independent. They can go out by themselves, and it's just dealing with the mental health breakdowns, or if someone's got learning disability, how much support they need to function. But then we started to support. So we bought a couple of care homes, and the difference between how you're able to support someone in their independence in care homes versus somebody who's physically more able is just so stark, because you really rely on that funding to a large extent fully try and get someone the true independence that they need if they have quite high needs. You really need that. And as the funding is being reduced and restricted, you're seeing your ability to take people out, to give them that one to one support, also restricted. And it's not for want of trying, or it's not that managers don't have the passion to do that. But I definitely see in some managers a frustration where you might have some people we support who have extra funding where they can do more, versus somebody who doesn't have that funding or isn't able to self fund and reliant on local authority funding, and they can't do as much, and we can only do so much with them. So I definitely do. I hope that governments will look a little bit more at how they are funding social care for older people, or how they are supporting social care to continue helping people to be independent, because it's amazing what you can do. And what we're trying at the moment is, I don't know if you've heard of the blue zones. So you can go on Netflix, you can Google, you can search it. I think it's still there. But there's this researcher, and over, I think, 3 decades or something, he went to different areas across the world to see where people were living to 100 or beyond 100. And he created very simple template of key areas that people were working on within those communities. And some people may think, well, it must be connected with something that's in the water or the weather, or it's isolated to an area, but they are scattered all over the world, over the continents, I think, pretty much. And but there's still some synergies, and it's around food. It's about local, fresh fish, pescatarian diet, really. And it's about community. So some people were 99, 100, still living on their own, still doing bowls, still seeing their family regularly. It's about, one other quadrant was around activities. So having a meaningful activity. It's not just doing stuff, it's doing something that means something to them. So some people used to do woodwork all their lives, so they continue doing that woodwork, and it stimulates the brain. It staves off dementia. It keeps people active. So there's these, and one of them, which I love, is around drink and community. So allowing yourself a glass of wine, and just feeling relaxed, not going too crazy. But a lot of these centurions were doing that. They were actually 100 and drinking a glass of wine now and again during the week. So it was about really continuing that full life. So what we're doing in a couple of our care homes now is to see how we can embed that ethos within the organization, so we can do a due diligence of those different areas, of that meaningful activity, of the food provision, how we can look at everything in order to increase people's uh, ability to live to 100 and beyond, and live healthy, so you can actually improve people's health from when they actually came to you. It doesn't have to be a place where somebody goes, care home doesn't have to be a place where somebody goes for end of life. It could be actually somewhere somebody goes for community to increase their life chances and increase their positive experiences. So that's something that we're trying to work on as well.
Mm. It resonates with something that I think you put on LinkedIn. I think it was earlier today. Sort of a commentary about one of your managers, and you just said to your manager, "Can you give them something better than where they are now?" And that was a lovely phrase of, and it's a challenge statement, but it's a lovely sort of emphasis of what social care is about. I think the NHS is about fix. You've got a problem, we're going to fix you in out as quickly as we can. We have this social media and this news media, which is everything is either incredibly awful or incredibly good, and it's social media perfect and clickbait and look at me, I'm wonderful, I'm having this great holiday. Social care is this utter reflection of life. It's messy, it's long term. We've got to try stuff, we've got to prototype, we've got to explore ideas, but we're always working to something better. And good today is never good enough tomorrow. We're always going to improve and cycle on it. And yeah, what you just said really resonated with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I love working in the social care sector. It's not about targets, it's not about numbers, it's about experiences and doing what's right for the people that we support. And it's so personalized, it's so different from the health service, quite rightly. And I think people don't quite understand when people do social care, when they work in the care sector, when they stay in it for so long, it's because they know they can improve people's lives. They can be the hand that's held when family can't be there at end of life. And they really do have a purpose. And that purpose is, I think, what's missing from a lot of people's lives. If you see the mental health issues that just people who don't need care have at the moment, they're skyrocketing. But within the care sector, you can come into work and know that you have improved somebody's life, you've supported them every single day. And yes, there are frustrations, but I think sometimes we get lost in worrying about CQC and worrying about inspections from local authorities and funding. And actually, if you just take a breath and look and see what you've done for those people that you support, it's incredible. It really is incredible. And yeah, like I was just saying to that manager, don't fear it. Don't fear it. Yes, you can see a care plan. It looks absolutely like the biggest challenge of your life. But if you're not there to support that person and help them have a better life, then who is there for them? Just try and support them. You've got the training, you've got the backing. If it doesn't work out, then at least you've tried. But as long as you know that you can give that person a chance at increasing their quality of life, then you must try and do that. That's what we're there for. But it's a scary thing to do, manage a care service, and I don't take that away from any manager. I do totally get that, but we do make a huge difference in people's lives. Mm.
What you just said sounds like a perfect call to action for the, was it a million 16 to 24-year-olds the BBC is saying are out of work at the moment? Which is a scary number, which surprises me actually because it's a really emotionally intelligent group. If you speak to anyone in that sort of that age demographic, they're individuals who sort of had the cognitive awareness of what COVID was. They've gone through it and they've come out the other side very emotionally intelligent as a result. They're almost perfect for workers within social care. Um, yeah, is that something that we need to be tapping into, getting those younger people to work for us?
Absolutely. And that was the Milburn report or something that came out.
Mm.
And it's really sad because one of the hats that I've worn for a while is governor of a local college, SDS, and I see, I interact with young people and young learners, and I see how wise they are, how dedicated they are, and it's fantastic to see. And actually, our recruitment manager came to me a couple of weeks ago, and then I asked her to develop the idea, and she's come back to me. I spoke to her yesterday, and she said, "I've got a great idea. I think what we should do is, well, we will create a readiness for work program which will sit alongside or inside some of the health and social care, like T levels or whatever training that they're doing at colleges. We will help them to understand how they need to prepare for CVs, help them with mock interviews, and then maybe some of those young people will be some feeders into work, into our organization. So we've helped them, give them a purpose, given them some work experience. We do that anyway, but also help them with the confidence that they need to be in the workplace. And when I took a real moment to listen to what she said, I just thought, well, yeah, that's a no-brainer, isn't it? It's that connection between employer and college, employer and school. And I was listening to Radio 4. I'm a big fan of the World at One. I think Sarah Montague, she's fabulous. I really like her presence as a presenter. And somebody said that, I think it was one of their guests, that school is now becoming, you don't want school to become somewhere where people leave into unemployment. So you're training them almost for failure. You're training them to be unemployed rather than to get employed. You don't want that to happen. And I was thinking there is quite a lot in our education system, because you could apply that to universities. You could apply that to lots of different areas. How are we getting young people ready for the world of work? And they were saying that some young people struggle with answering the phone. They get anxious. So one organization said they have anxiety days for Gen Z, which are basically like mental health days, I suppose, or they'll have a day off because they've got anxiety. But she said it's difficult because even though that does help the young person, you've got to explain it to the rest of the staff team who think, what is an anxiety day? But maybe as organizations, we need to adapt to the way young people are at the moment. They have challenges that we don't have. And we need to get in there. We, as employers, schools need to work with employers, colleges need to work with employers, pay them a bit of money to come in, release some staff and talk to young learners, and bridge that gap, because I feel the gap between education and work is just massive. And young people don't know how to, may not, I don't want to say this to all young people, because a lot of young people I know are very eloquent, but it's that I remember having that nervousness of answering a phone in an office and greeting someone at a door. So we need, as I think employers and colleges and education institutions, we need to have a better way of coming together and meeting young people where they are, rather than blaming them or seeing that they're the problem for some reason, or blaming it on phones. Yeah, they're part of the problem, but there's a bigger issue which you just adapt to. You just adapt to. And I did love the idea of our recruitment manager, and I think we're going to take that forward. But we do, I mean, we've had an intern recently. We tend to have interns from the University of West of England every year. Fabulous, absolutely fabulous. They're so good. And, we do tailor it to them to make sure, I say to every intern, by the time you leave my organization, you must have at least 4 things you could put on your CV that you own, whether it's running a project, whether it's helping to produce some kind of knowledge share, whether it's blogs or writing articles, whatever it is. So you have tangible things to go away with on your CV to help your career. We've had interns that have come, my PA now, she's been with us for about 10 years, and she was a apprentice. But it has become more expensive to employ apprentices, and that for a whole heap of reasons. But that's not helping. So we just need some good governance, I think, in this country to just deal with the hard issues, because otherwise we are going to let these young people down. And it's very, very sad. And it's a massive loss, because the young people we have in our organisation are we have a manager of one of our outstanding care homes, and she became registered manager at like 24. And she did have a lot of support team around her, fine. But we worked with her insecurities, and she's, I can't possibly do that. I said, we actually see that you're fabulous at this. And she's a better manager than I would ever be. She manages people who are 2, 3 times her age, and very calm, very confident, and extremely intelligent. So we just need to make sure we don't let our young people down. It's really important. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Sophie, that's been fantastic. Thank you so much for your time. We could probably talk for another couple of hours, but I've got to let you go back to the wider world, I'm afraid. If people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way of them reaching out to you?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn pretty much most minutes of the day. So find me, Sophie Chester-Glyn, Chester-Glyn, one N on the Glyn, on LinkedIn. That's probably the easiest. Or hi at CoProduce Care is the .com. Hi at CoProduceCare.com is the email to get in touch with me there. That's a good one to get in touch with me. Mm.
That's brilliant. Sophie, once again, thank you so much for your time. It's been lovely to see
Thank
you.
you. And carry on with the wonderful work you're doing here. It's fabulous. Thank you.